Hello, everyone. Welcome to the semi-weekly Tablas Creek Instagram live broadcast. I am, as always, Jason Haas. So my guest this week is Eric Guido, who writes about the wines of Italy and Paso Robles and the Pacific Northwest for Vinous, and is, I think, producing some of the most interesting writing about wine that I have the opportunity to read. So I can't wait to get to talk to Eric a little bit about his path into wine. But as I always do, while we're waiting for people to join, I wanted to share some pictures of what's going on at the winery. And you may notice that I am not in my normal spot outside on our patio, and that's because it's raining. So the pictures, let me show you what we are looking at here. Okay, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. Instagram Live has moved around some of the options that we have here. So I think, okay, it's now saying that there are the opportunity to do emojis, but not the opportunity to do pictures. That is really interesting. Okay, I'm going to not do that then. And I will just tell you a little bit about what's going on. I will take you to the window. And you can see out, we are currently very kind of misty, dark. We got a couple inches of rain already this week, which is lovely. It is very much welcome and needed. We are also bottling. We are bottling the Patalana Tablas Rosé, the Dianthus Rosé, and the Vermentino this week, which is exciting. It's the first of the 2023s to get into bottle. And we're enjoying the animals being out in the vineyard. We've got sheep littering the hillside behind the winery, and it's perfect for them. You can practically hear the cover crop growing. Okay, with that as an introduction, I am going to see that Eric just sent in a request to be a part, so I'm going to say work as smoothly as it did when we did our test a little bit ago. Okay, just accept.
Hello.
Amazing. Technology is amazing when it works.
It is amazing when it works. I did have a moment of worrying after our test last week that the location might have something to do with it, but it looks like we're all good.
Yeah, and I always wonder, and there was one, I did a conversation last year with Esther Mobley, and it worked fine on when we did the test from my personal account, and then would not work when I tried to do it from the Tablas Creek account. We ended up having to reschedule, tried a million different things, and ended up doing it from my personal account and then just sharing it on the Tablas Creek account later. It was inexplicable. We still haven't figured out what the issue was.
Well, Instagram can be great until it's not. That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. Awesome. So I love to start with asking people who write about wine, which came first, the interest in writing or the interest in wine?
Actually, the interest in writing came first. Completely, but this is going back to when I was a teenager. I was doing, fictional writing. I was, writing novelettes and such, and poetry and music. I was a musician going far enough back. So definitely the writing did come first. And even to this day, when I write, I see it very much as more of a creative thing than obviously I'm a journalist, but I see it as more of a creative space that I have to create before I can even sit down and write a piece.
I feel like that comes through in the way that you write. I feel like you tell stories in your writing in a way that I don't always see with people who are writing for publications for whom the notes on individual wines are often the priority. I feel like the articles that you write about the regions and about the producers that you cover, like there's a narrative to them. And I guess, is that something that you do consciously, or is that just a function of having come up with sort of narrative fictional writing, or am I off base here?
No, so I don't know. I don't think it's something that I do I don't go into it with the idea that that's the way I'm going to write. I don't see it as the style that I'm trying to create. It's just really the way it comes out of me. Um, I can tell you that when I write, obviously a lot of research goes into it beyond the meetings that I have with producers and the tastings and such. But there always seems to be this moment where I go from conceptualizing the article to suddenly just being like, boom, like, and it just starts pouring out at that point. And that's when it really feels much more like that creative writer again. And, like obviously I'm not writing fiction, but it's more of that flow of creativity that just comes out. And, for me, what's always very important is the story behind the wine. And so if I'm going to write the way I want to read. You know what I'm saying? So if I want to understand that story behind the wine, then that's where it's going to come from. It's going to understand those stories from the producers, from their history, and with the passion that drives them, and then me try to communicate that. And so I can see why it would come across that way. And actually, I appreciate the fact that you even noticed that.
No, I think it jumps out when I read your articles. So cool. Okay, so going back, how did you get interested in wine? Was it on your family table as you were growing up?
Definitely, my family was, so it was less about, wine was not something that was made a big deal of in my family. Definitely, there's always, it wasn't like my family were collectors of wines. They didn't sit down and, analyze or, meditate to a glass of wine. But it was more like the jug of white and the jug of red that were next to each other in the refrigerator. And that very much came from my grandparents. My grandfather's family is from Italy, and for him, wine was something that was just in the house and was on the table all the time. And there was really never like a big deal made of it. It was just something that was always part of our culture growing up.
So how did you? I think the first time we met, you were working at Morrell. And like, how did you decide to do a career in wine? Because if I remember right, you went to culinary school, right? You're trained as a chef. Like, how did wine happen?
So it was definitely part of the culinary experience, but it really was. It was sort of a surprise to me as well, when I sort of caught the bug. So yes, I had gone to culinary school. I was working at a restaurant named Thor, the hotel in Rivington. I was also working a day job at that time, just making ends meet and such. And I was attending classes still at my culinary school. And one night, so I had a very long day of the day job, and I had class that night. But the only class I had was an elective for appreciating wine. So at that point in my life, I liked wine. I liked to drink wine, but I was one of those people that, I had the wine rack on the top of the refrigerator, the worst place to keep it. I was buying wine at the local corner, wine and liquor shop, and at that point, my preference was actually towards Sangiovese and Barolo. But I didn't know why I liked it, and many times I was disappointed, and I always just blamed myself for being disappointed in the experience. I wasn't thinking about the possibility that it was where I was sourcing it from and how I was storing it and how I was trying to enjoy it at night. So this one day when I'm working this long day and I have this elective appreciate wine coming up that night, and I'm on the phone with my wife, and I'm like, honey, I think I'm just gonna skip this class tonight. I'm really tired. I just want to come home. And she's like, no, you paid for this. This is part of the whole experience. And so I certainly owe a large part of where I ended up with to her. So I decided to go to this class, and it was the first time in my life that I was actually served a wine that was properly stored, the right temperature, in the right glass. And then I had someone telling me, like where it was coming from and how it was made. And being this person that always had that like storytelling mentality, I suddenly just completely fell in love with it. I fell in love with the details of it. I fell in love with I'm trying to understand the experience and trying to connect what was in the glass to what I was being told, where it came from. And it became a huge passion of mine. Now, at that point in my life, I couldn't necessarily explore that passion. I was working two jobs. But that was certainly the very beginning, because suddenly, instead of just being a chef working at a restaurant, once I had graduated school, I started implementing wine into what we were doing in the kitchen. And it was at a time when that was not actually. Nowadays, it's very common that a chef knows a lot about wine, but at that point, it really wasn't. There were very few chefs that I would work with where they would actually want to be involved in the pairing of the food and the wine. It was more like the somm would come back to the kitchen. They would tell the chef what the person ordered. If it was some amazing bottle of wine, you'd have to adjust your recipe to make sure it wasn't going to interfere with the pairing. But beyond that, the average chef back then wasn't sitting there trying to make wine dinners and things such as that, which became one of my big passions and really led to me to dig deeper into the industry, which initially then became the writing side of things.
So, like, do you remember what that wine was that first night where you were like, "Oh, I get it," or did you have another like aha wine where that you remember early on?
So that night, I can't remember all of the wines that were served. I do specifically remember a Ridge Lytton Springs that was served that night. Now this is going back. This was in 2005. So I don't remember the vintage. I'm going to guess it was probably somewhere between 99, 2002, something like that. And that wasn't like my aha moment with wine when it comes to like a bottle where it's like, oh my God, wine could be this amazing. I'm not discrediting Lytton Springs. It's an amazing bottle to this day. I love a mature Lytton Springs. But that's certainly in that lineup of wines that started to prove to me, like why I wanted to dig deeper and why I wanted to fully understand. For me, the aha moment with wine, I remember it very well. This is past that time period with taking that class and such. At that point, so I was working 2 jobs. I had a little bit of extra income, and so I was able to start buying some wines and putting them away. And I knew that I loved Barolo at that point, and so I started seeking out more mature bottles of Barolo. And one night, coming home from the restaurant, I was always working dinner services, and so I was probably getting home around midnight, maybe even later, and just really wanted to have a couple glasses of wine. And so I go to one of these bottles I had bought from a retailer here in the city that specialized in older bottles, and pop that open. It was a 1996 Aldo Conterno Colonnello Barolo, and I'm sitting there with this wine, just having a couple glasses and passing the time. And I just remember this moment, just like looking at this glass, like, oh my God, like this is fabulous. And it was, and I was mesmerized by it. Absolutely. I was completely fell in love with the idea that this is what wine could be. And that set me on the path to becoming very much a big time Barolo collector in the early days, and kind of chasing the dragon of finding the exact moment to drink that bottle of Barolo, from the day you buy it, cellaring it, and keeping it in your cellar and watching it mature into that moment where it's that perfect place.
Do you remember what was the first thing that you wrote about wine?
First thing, like the first time I started writing about wine.
Yeah. What did you write about when you started writing about wine?
So initially, it was to really keep track of my own work with food and wine together. I started to do. I had this concept for a private dining company called the VIP table, and so what I began doing is I began to do these. I was basically doing recipe testing, but I was practicing it on either patrons in the restaurant, or what I would also do is I would get together people in my home, and I would do a thing where I would say, okay, guys, tonight I'm going to make 5 different risottos, and I'm going to put it against 5 different wines, and we're all going to sit down, and we're going to taste them afterwards, and we're going to decide exactly what pairs best with these dishes. And that was what really started me writing about wine, because at that point, I was thinking about it more from a perspective business and the idea that I needed to fully understand what worked well. If this mushroom risotto worked perfectly with this Barolo, why does it work perfectly? Taking notes. If this risotto ai tre pomodori works great with this Chianti, why does it work great? And then that work started to become a thing where I was like, well, I was essentially generating content. I didn't think about it like that at that time. I never even heard of a content creation as being something you would do for a living. And I started to, at that time, post it on a message board that used to exist on the Parker website. And that was what really got me started to start sharing that information with other people. People would read it. They would get I would get feedback from it. And so it became a thing where it was like, wow, people really actually appreciate reading this. And so it became a regular weekly thing. And it was actually on that forum that I found my first job from a gentleman named Greg Del Piazza, a company named Snooth, doesn't exist anymore. But at that time, he was the editor at Snooth. And he came to me one day and he's like, you're just doing this for free. He's like, let me pay you. It won't be amazing pay. He's like, but let me pay to do a weekly column for us. And that was the first job in the industry.
Those bulletin boards were, I mean, they were super powerful in wine. They were really where kind of wine lovers got together and found each other in that era. And this is what, like the second half of the 2000s and then early into the 20 teens. I mean, it was an important part of the wine world at that point.
And I think, one of the things that also really, for me, that was really inspiring, the whole coming full circle, is someone who was extremely active on that bulletin board was Antonio Galloni. And he would actually be involved in these conversations. And, for me to see someone whose work I followed so closely and looked up to that level, actually having that conversation with me was amazing. And, that's one of the greatest things that I love about where I am right now at Vinous, is that we still maintain a very active message board. And for Antonio, it's very important for all of us to be active on that board as well, all as members.
No. I've always been so impressed with that's the your say piece, right, of the Vinous site. Like, I've always been so impressed with the level of engagement that the whole team has with those discussions. It's a super cool service that you provide to the subscribers.
Yeah, definitely.
So was that how the gig at Vinous happened? Was it because of the interactions that you'd had with Antonio online, or did it happen in some other way?
That was certainly part of it. The fact that Antonio and I knew each other for such a long time, and it was very easy for him to see my progression in the industry as I slowly moved through. But there were certainly some key moments in between. You mentioned Morrell. So at one point in my life, I was I had stopped doing the private dining idea because 2008 happened and all kinds of people just stopped wanting to spend money.
Yep.
And I focused primarily on my day job at that point. So I was basically overseeing operations for a large nationwide retail company. But I was still writing. I still had my columns. I had picked up a couple extra columns. I was working for 3 different online publications at that point. It wasn't like a substantial income, but it was something. I was still heavily into wine. I was running a couple of tasting groups here in the city, in New York City. I have a Barolo group to this day, the group of friends that we all started together that started actually on the Vinous board, that to this day is still highly functional, and we opened some great bottles together. But at one point, I sat back and I was like, well, so I'm working this job and, it pays the bills, but I'm kind of bored. And even with the extra work at night, my day job has become something that, it's not fulfilling to me. So I was like, well, how can I take the 3 things that I do and turn it into one thing? I have, 15 years of, retail experience up into upper management. I have collecting of wine, tasting wines, analyzing wines, and I have this writing thing I've been doing. And so I basically just wrapped it up into a bundle, and I was like, okay, what could this job be? And I was like, well, let me take a look at wine retail. And literally within, I kid you not, within an hour of me placing my desire, however you would call it, on LinkedIn to go to these roles, I get a phone call from Jeremy Noy of Morrell Wine, who is like, hey, I know who you are. I read your work. And he's like, I'd love to have you come meet me, and let's talk about what we can do here. And so Jeremy was definitely a very big part of my moving forward into the industry, because when we met, it was obvious immediately that not only did we hit it off, not only did we have a really good team mentality, we had the same exact idea of what could be done. He had just taken over the CEO of Morrell Wine Group and had a lot of really big ideas. He wanted to create a annual catalog. At a time when everyone was going digital, he wanted to create an analog catalog, a coffee table book that would basically be all of our own writing, all of our own photography, we would use critic scores, but we wouldn't focus on the critic scores. It wouldn't be like a in your face, pow bam kind of thing. It would be more like, and this is what, Antonio Galloni thinks about this wine. But the majority of the book would be focused on RID. It would be like a guide to the brand. And so, I mean, he's telling me about this, and I'm just like, yeah, like totally, let's do this. And it was a huge success. It was a huge success for the company. And so, I was at Morrell for 5 years. At that point, when I left, I was the buyer for the company. I was running part of their operation and doing all the content creation in the catalog. But during that time period, I also became friends with a gentleman named Jan D'Agata. So Jan D'Agata was the Italian critic for Vinous at the time. And he was running a bunch of different festivals and tasting events in Italy. And that's how he and I got to know each other. And through a long time of tasting with him, traveling with him, working with him, started hosting panels with him, doing lecturing with him. And so the time came that he decided he wanted to retire. Now I'm assuming this is how it happened. Jan basically had said to me that he thought I was his heir apparent, which I'm assuming he communicated to Antonio. Antonio knew me at the time. And so I think that, between those roles and what I had accomplished at Morrell, it became sort of a very easy move to make into the Vinous, the world here of Vinous.
Vinous ecosystem.
Yeah, totally. It is its own
cool.
world.
So can you give people a sense of sort of what your day-to-day, week-to-week work is like? Like, I mean, obviously there's lots of pieces of it. There's the traveling piece, there's the tasting piece, there's the writing piece. How do you structure all that?
Certainly. So it's a big question, by the way. And I'm sure everyone in my company and everyone in my line of work does it completely differently. So yeah, my years are split up between travel and being at home or in the office. Travel is obviously the place where I can get the most amount of my work done and pick up the most amount of information. I would say I spend about 3 to possibly up to 4 months a year on the road, and in that time, it's certainly a lot of work. I think a lot of people, when they think about the job of a wine critic, they're assuming it's like a very lavish thing. We taste a lot of wine. And in order to create the amount of content, the producer profiles, the actual articles, I mean, we are journalists. We need to be in the field. We need to be learning what's going on. Sometimes that information comes really easy. Sometimes you have to really pry it from people. Sometimes you really are an investigative journalist in this line of work, because you will be in some situations where, someone doesn't really want to tell you why this vintage wasn't as good as they want to say it is. And then obviously there's a tasting component, which on the road, you can get a lot of tasting done because you have other people that can move the bottles around, move the glassware around, and you can basically come in, you can spend your, whatever it be, 10, 11, 12 hours a day going from place to place, interviewing, tasting, and working. When I'm not on the road, it's more about splitting up my time between tasting and writing, where, we have a very small team of people in the office, but they do a tremendous job of organizing everything and keeping things moving in a good working way. So I'll arrive, we'll have, a tasting set up. Morning and afternoon, I like to split up just so I can have, like some kind of palate cleansing lunch in the middle. So I'll have days where I'll do tasting, which is focused 100% on notes, 100% on the wines. That's usually about 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week. And then a day or two that'll be pure writing. And just for my own way of making it work, my writing days are just for writing, and those are typically the days where you do like a work from home thing, because you want to just bury yourself, as I was saying, in that more creative space and find that thing that gets the article to like flow, And so split up the weeks pretty well. But I will say, there are definitely some really great bottles of wine and really great wine experiences that come with this job. But it is a lot of work as well.
I think you see a related sort of whatever general viewpoint to what we see. Like, oh yeah, you run a winery. You probably sit there on your patio with
Right.
your feet up, drinking a nice glass of wine, watching the grapevines do their work. It's like,
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I'll sometimes I'll tell some people like when when you're in a tasting room and everything's perfect, it's great, and then I'll reflect on some of the stories that have happened in the past, and like one that I like to bring up without naming regions is one tasting where I show up and I kid you not, it's 102, 103 degrees. I'm tasting very big tannic red wines in the middle of Italy in a stone church with like no windows. I'm sitting on a rock, and I have a 5 gallon bucket on the side, and it's amazing when you think about some of the ways that you end up in a tasting situation versus others where you're like this calm, boardroom with the air conditioning, and it's not always the ideal situation, that's for sure. And many times people will apologize for, the setup of their tasting. I'm like, don't apologize. This is amazing. You have a table, you have chairs, you have air conditioning.
I love the whole sitting on a rock. Like
No, yeah,
that's
totally, totally.
so you started out responsible for big chunks of Italy with Venice, and those responsibilities have grown to include what now? Washington and Oregon and Paso Robles. Is that everything, or did I miss
Yes.
it? Because that's a lot. Um, how did like were those newer regions past beyond Italy, were those places that you came in saying I really want to explore those regions, or was that kind of opportunity at Venice that you were like, hey, I'm here, I would love to do that? How did those expansions come about?
Well, with Washington, certainly it was more of a coming in the door situation. My time at Morrell, I really fell in love with Washington State wines, specifically from the perspective of their value that they represented over some of the more expensive New World Bordeaux blend regions. Um, and so I built the book in Morrell with Washington wine to a large degree. And when we first started having conversations coming on board, at that time, Stephen Tanzer had already hinted that, there was going to be a time he was going to be retiring in the near future. And so, part of that conversation coming in the door is like, guys, I would love to take over Washington when that time comes. As for Oregon and Paso, this just happened recently through events that we couldn't prevent. But in the end, Oregon was a love of mine since the very beginning. I mentioned Barolo. When I started looking for New World locations to find more of an old world style of wine that at that point in my life I really appreciated, Oregon is where I found myself. And it was actually one of the first places in the United States where I was actually on mailing lists and collecting wine from the region. At that time, primarily it was Pinot Noir. Chardonnay wasn't quite a thing at that time, but it was definitely Pinot, and that was my location to source it from. As for Paso, Paso was actually introduced to me through Josh Reynolds. Josh and I had known each other for quite a while, and we realized we had some very similar tastes. And for me, at that point, this is going back a few years, I was more along the lines of like, well, I really like Rhones from the Rhone. I never really appreciated a lot of stuff I tasted from the United States. And the reality is, I was just looking for the wrong places. I was looking at the wrong places. I was looking at the wrong producers, and that's how he introduced Paso to me and starting to bring a lot of wines to our tastings that we'd have together that were extremely eye-opening to me. To find that amount of energy in such a big and powerful wine is something that I just had never thought I could experience in the United States, and it certainly set me on a path to trying to explore more and more of those wines. And so when the time came, we all picked up different responsibilities, but I was very happy to take on Paso and then also to take on Oregon. And also for Paso, it was more of a time when at that time I was covering it with the idea that we would have Josh back covering it in the near future, and unfortunately it didn't work out that way. But I can certainly tell you, visiting there after having tasted the wines and experiencing them firsthand, and then being the producers, totally fell in love.
Yeah, because you had the really hard task of landing in Paso to be sort of the official representative for Venice, like the same week that Josh passed away. It's like that can't have been easy. But beyond that, I was wondering, like, do you have a favorite memory of Josh that you'd like to share?
We all have favorite memories of Josh. I think of the ones the most PC to share. um, I can tell you one. I can tell you my favorite memory of Josh is actually I had this big barbecue, and it probably started around, say, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a weekend affair. A lot of great wine, as you can imagine. There was some, a lot of collectors there. Josh was there, and throughout the day, people started filtering out and such. And it had been a long day, but it had been a good day. And so at this point, we have our house. It's a corner property, and in the corner property, we have like this nice tree. We have like a bench. We have this little like wishing well thing and stone piece. And 2 o'clock in the morning, there's me and Josh after this long, long day, and we're just sitting there on the corner of my my property, looking out at my neighborhood, drinking this bottle of Riesling Cabernet from Schaefer Frolic, and just like waxing poetic over this wine, like out loud to the whole neighborhood. Out there, and it was just great because he was one of these people that he could find and appreciate the greatest wines in the world and take it down to just such a level that was just pure pleasure. It was so beyond the evaluation point. It was just about the love of it. It was about the company that he was with. It was always as if it was always like as if it was a stage with Josh. Like you were always on a stage with Josh. It was always like it was a show, and it just came so naturally to him. And to be in his presence in those moments like that was just always such an uplifting feeling. And it just brought a lot of joy to people, myself included.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. So I spoke last year with Clive Pursehouse, the U.S. editor for Decanter, who was talking about how hard it was in a life where you are spending a lot of your time traveling, tasting, eating, to maintain fitness, to maintain health and balance. I know you're a serious cyclist, and I just wondered if you would talk a little bit about how you think about maintaining that balance.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that having a sport is a very big part of maintaining that balance, and and staying true to your schedule with that sport. So I mean, and the way I say it is that, so for instance, with cycling, for me, I split my time between cycling, kickboxing, and weightlifting. And so it's 7 days a week. There's never a day that I'm not doing something. My recovery is based on what I did the day before versus what I'm doing the day after, so I'm not overworking one thing or the other. And so for me, it's always about the idea that, there are opportunities in this business as well as in the in the retail side of this business that you could just be out all night. And it would be very easy just to be out all night. You could be out all night every night. But having that thing that that you are committed to, that you're getting up every morning to do, is the reason why, when I have a dinner and it's 9 o'clock, I'm like, hey guys, I got to get going. Yeah. And I even base a lot of my scheduling around that, where, there are events that take place where I'm like, look, I'm really sorry, I just can't do this. Obviously if it's a tasting and it's like purely work related, you're also not drinking at that point. Like you're that person that is still spitting at the end of the day because you taste wine all day long. So I think that's very important. And I think that having that physical activity is extremely important as well.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. That makes a ton of sense. And I think that knowing that it's something that you do every day matters. That it's not like you're going to try to make up in one day for having just eaten and drunk your way through a region the whole rest of the week.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly important. I mean, it's important for your own health. It's important for your family. This is the kind of job where someone can lose themselves in this job. And so it's extremely important to always have your priorities straight. And I think that having that sport is a very big part of that.
Cool. Okay. I have two more questions. One of them is, was there anything about Paso Robles, when you got the chance to really dive into it, that kind of confounded your expectations, or that you thought was surprising, or if not necessarily surprising to you, maybe something that people at large don't know about Paso but should?
I mean, if more than anything, I allude to the energy in the wines. That was the thing that really just boggled my mind. Coming there and tasting wines, so we have a lot of regions that struggle with having higher alcohol percentages. This is something that's happening all throughout the world at this point. Coming to Paso and finding such a balance, and not just in a few producers' portfolios. My original idea was that, okay, we're gonna find 10, 15 producers that are able to find a really good balance that makes the wines that kind of like that magic point where you have that the alcohol, the acidity, the concentration of fruit that just makes them ultimately pleasurable and balanced on the palate that people love. And I get there, and I find that there is such a larger amount of producers that are finding that balance. I mean, for me, that was the thing that was the most surprising. I was expecting there to be more of the bigger, clunkier wines where I can't bring this to the dinner table. It's like, no. You can bring these wines to the dinner table. I mean, you don't want to drink the whole bottle, but you can bring these wines to the dinner table, and they're going to pair perfectly, and you're going to go through glass after glass. The hard part is saying, oh, wait, I've had 3 glasses. I shouldn't have any more, because they're just so easy to like, and they're just so balanced. I would say that was definitely the most surprising thing for me.
Well, I'm happy to hear it, because that was honestly the most surprising thing for us too. Like in our 30 years here, is like we keep being surprised at how important those cold nights are, and how much brightness comes with the region. Because I think Paso, it has the reputation because people come more often than not. They come in the summer and they're out during the day, and it can, like, there can be days in the summer that it feels like you live on the surface of the sun here. But the grapevines are out at night too, when the temperature has dropped 45 degrees from whatever it was at the daytime high, and they're here in the winter when it's cold, and they're here in those shoulder seasons in the spring and fall where it's chilly. And like that comes through in the wines, and it took us by surprise too. So
that's pretty amazing. When you mentioned earlier, when you first started this live, that you guys have rain at this point. I mean, how is the rain so far in this season from a percentage of expectations?
We're at almost exactly 100% of normal. This winter so far has been so boring. It's been lovely. Like we had a very exciting winter last winter, and we've had a lot of exciting weather out here in Paso Robles, and having a year where we're basically getting a whole bunch of gentle rainstorms in exactly the proportions that you would expect based on your long-term averages, where you don't have to worry about floods, you don't have to worry about pulling the animals out of the vineyard because like they're compacting the soil because you got 5 inches of rain in the last day. You don't have to worry about like, will the cover crop germinate because you had this unusual month of sun in the middle of the winter. Like, it hasn't been any of that. We've basically been getting 1/2 inch to 1.5 inch rainstorms every 4 days for the last 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the winter season last year was very difficult for many logistical reasons in your region. But I'm certainly really interested in seeing the result in the wines, having a season with that much of a built-up of water supply in Paso. It's going to be really interesting.
And then followed by the coldest year that we've had since 2011. So you had plenty of water, and then you had basically no heat stress all year. I think it makes for fascinating wines. I can't wait to share them with you.
Yeah. No, it's going to be exciting.
Okay, one last question. And thank you for your pay. We're already over half an hour. I cannot believe that like it has gone so fast, because I have about 8 questions more written down that I wanted to ask. But I have one that I want to finish with. I know, like, following you on Instagram, one of the things that I see is all of these incredibly delectable photos of meat that you have cooked. Can you talk about the carnivore diet a little bit, and kind of how you think about it, and what it all means?
Sure. So I found my way to the carnivore diet, having done keto for quite a while. You mentioned the whole sport aspect. I was doing keto more for an energy perspective. It wasn't to lose weight or anything like that. Human body runs very well on ketones. But it's also incredibly difficult to find your nutritional balance on keto. And so with my level of activity, it started becoming an issue where I simply couldn't get the amount of nutrients that I needed to sustain that level of activity. And that's how I found carnivore. Carnivore is essentially, it's basically you eat only animal products. Preferably red meat, ruminant animals. Sorry. You know, you get a call during an Instagram live. Preferably red meat, ruminant animals, butter, cheese, eggs, which are extremely nutrient-dense foods. And you eliminate everything else. You eliminate vegetables, sugar. I no longer drink coffee. I took out one of my favorite things in life, hot sauce. Things like that. Which, by the way, really improved my tasting game. Taking things off of your palate that fatigue them, you don't even realize how much they fatigue them. Huh. The days of like having an espresso in the middle of the day between tasting sessions, I used to be really tired in the second half of the day from a palate fatigue standpoint. It just doesn't happen now. You just taste. It's amazing. But yeah, no, it's a total lifestyle. Tremendous amount of energy. You don't need to take any kind of supplements or anything like that. I just eat the most nutritionally dense food on the planet and feel great for it. I've been doing it now for 16 months. It's pretty fantastic. I mean, I'm not going to get into the full details of all the different things that it does, but there are tremendous health benefits as well. And there's a lot of misinformation about why it is unhealthy, that if people look a little bit below the surface, they can see why it's really not that unhealthy, and how a lot of that information that's out there really isn't actually legitimate or has been disproven, yet maybe not shared, things such as that. But yeah, it's pretty incredible. It's a little difficult on the road. I tend to try to find hotels with kitchenettes and stay at a lot of Airbnbs so I can cook for myself. But having done it for over a year now, I've certainly started to get the swing of things, and it's become a lot easier.
Cool, awesome. Well, thank you. Well, what a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your story. If people
so, am I going to see red Vinous icons?
Oh, absolutely. We should talk about that because that's coming right up. That's a little over a month.
About a month away. Yeah, a little over a month away. So I hear you're going to be pouring a 2003 and 2006 Esprit.
Yeah.
I'll be definitely stopping by your table.
Yeah, it's going to be Neil who's flying in to do it. Neil and his wife Marcy, because I will have just be coming back from a trip to Asia, and I decided that in the interest of actually having a little bit of work-life balance, I would share the opportunity to come and pour at the cool event, and instead reintroduce myself to my family. So I'm super jealous of Neil because the event sounds amazing, and I know the wines that we're showing are going to be cool. I mean, just being in that room with 70 something of the greatest producers in the world in New York to celebrate this first ever event is, I think, going to be so cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, when the time came to decide who we would want to have at Vinous Icons, I couldn't imagine. I thought you guys would be the perfect, and Antonio 100% agreed. You guys would be the perfect choice from Paso, that's for sure. So it's going to be pretty fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for including us. We're honored. So if people want to learn more about you and your work, obviously they should be subscribing to Vinous if they're not already. Are there other ways? I mean, obviously following you on Instagram is a good thing. How else do people learn more about you or getting into contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to be very active on Instagram. Instagram is sort of my, I guess, my kind of personal enjoyment of wines, and what I post and what I think about them, older vintages, things like that are off the cuff, at a restaurant with a producer, someone opens an older vintage, or just pulling something from my cellar that really stands out. So it's certainly a great resource from that perspective. Obviously, Vinous is really the place to follow me when it comes to the articles and the tasting notes. It's I can say that of all of the places that I could be working for, of all the different companies I could be working for, I cannot imagine working with a better group of people, of writers and such. I find myself reading their work. While not finding myself going many other places to look around for my own consumption of content. But primarily it's Instagram and Vinous itself.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Eric, Guido, thank you so much for taking a chunk out of your Wednesday to chat, and I look forward to seeing you either in New York or next time you're out here.
Yeah, sounds great. I plan to be out there in the next few months, so I'll definitely make sure to hook up with you guys.
Sounds great. Okay, awesome. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Eric, for joining. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Take care.